So once again, we're back with more deck games and heartache with the recent release of the most anticipated Season 2 of all time. That of course is the Season 2 of Squid Game. Now of course this season following its first was always going to be filled with gross, fun and emotional deaths. Some happening to characters that I personally didn't think would ever actually die. But now of course, just like we did with the first season, we're here to explain, revisit and look at every single death that of course happened in this second season. And I mean every single death. From the likes of the random number 72 to the emotional and honestly heartbreaking death of Jung-bae or number 390 that of course happened at the end of the series. We'll be looking and explaining them all, with no death being considered too small. So with that said, sit back, relax and let's begin with the first death of the season, coming from the legend that will always be Mr. Kim. Now Mr. Kim is of course the loan shark who helped gi-hun track down the salesman. He died when both he and Woo-suk were captured and forced into a Russian roulette version of rock paper scissors, otherwise known as rock paper scissors -1, which is essentially a version of rock paper scissors that uses 2 hands. Now the heartbreaking moment in this game actually came when Woo-suk pulled 2 rocks, and Mr. Kim of course pulled a paper and a scissors. All Mr. Kim of course had to do in this moment to win would be simply pull away his hand that had scissors, which of course would leave paper, which we all know beats rock. But when it of course came time for him to do this, Mr. Kim refused to pull away either hand, disqualifying himself from the game and of course saving his friend, but also subsequently killing himself. Now I think it's fair to say that this is the saddest and most beautiful death of all of Squid Game, as it actually had me on the brink of fucking tears and I barely even knew either of the characters at this point in time. But now of course we move on to the next death of the show, which of course was actually the salesman himself, in the same exact episode in fact. He dies, or more specifically kills himself, after a Russian roulette game against gi-hun, where after going back and forth for quite some time, it ultimately came down to that 6th and final bullet. Now in this moment, he clearly contemplated turning the gun on gi-hun and simply killing him. But after a good push and a punch to the ego by gi-hun, he of course followed through and completed the game by turning the gun on himself, of course taking his own life and marking the end of that episode. Now the next death we see doesn't actually come until the 3rd episode of the series, when we of course see the contestants playing the red light green light game. The first death in this game came from the beyond beautiful player 196, who of course died as a result of her moving due to the bee that landed on her neck. This of course then led player 283 into a panic, which of course also resulted in her getting shot. This then was followed by 455, 371 and 115, before the mass panic of hundreds of contestants of course led to the deaths of many more. The ones seen during the mass panic are 406, 292, 338, 262, 250, 020, 217 and 066. Next we of course see a terrified young woman who is also known as player 188, shaking her way all the way towards the afterlife, which of course was followed by player 244. Now everything after this seemed perfect and gi-hun's plan was actually working incredibly well, until Thanos or player 230 decided to push and subsequently kill players 216, 270 and 257, before he then continued to dance like a nutjob all the way towards the end. The next deaths then seen in this game were actually followed shortly after this, by players 355, 293, 237 and 229. But then as the rest of the players started to make it across the line and survive, players 165, 384 and 444 were shot for having failed to do the same. Except as far as 444 was concerned, he was actually shot in the leg before then getting shot in the head later on by guard number 11 to confirm the kill. But now she didn't just confirm the kill in that moment, she also confirmed the end of that game. Some time then passes before the next death, which of course came in the next team-based game known as the 6-leg pentathlon. In this game, the very first 2 teams to play it are actually the first 2 teams to die, with Team 1 of course consisting of players 286, 045, 254, 395 and 341, and Team 2 of course consisting of 016, 198, 189, 416 and 178. We then see that as the game continues and the montage plays, that many teams achieve victory in this game. But alternatively, during that same montage, we actually see that many of the teams do not achieve victory and many of them are shot dead, with players 382, 273, 429, 014, 148, 004, 167, 437, 412, 206, 178, 212, 330, 032, 046, 234 and 357, all dying as a result of losing the game. We then see the 2 final teams begin to play the game for themselves, with 001's and 456's team of course winning. But sadly, as they're cheering, the other team is of course shot dead. That team of course consisting of players 135, 239, 263, 415 and 453. We then take a minor break from all the chaos and death to see just how much was made and how many were actually killed in that last game, with it being revealed that currently there are just 255 players remaining in the game, also meaning that a total of 110 players were killed in the previous game of death. We then of course move on to the next game of death, which is called Mingle. Here a number gets called out and you must gather in a group of that size and go to the rooms. If you do not gather in the correct size or you are left outside the room when the timer ends, you are of course killed. Now as the first round begins, it also ends quite quickly, with a number of players losing right off the rip. Many of these numbers are impossible to see in this moment, with the only exception being 043, who of course was last seen alive but was likely harvested and killed later on during the organ exchange. We then see that as the games continue and round 2 begins, the next number being called out is of course number 4. But as everyone enters their rooms, we of course see that players 256, 316, 313, 050 and 238 were all killed for either losing the game or simply breaking its rules. The next number that's called is of course 3, and as everyone runs to their doors once again, we of course see that players 034, 038, 104, 109, 291, 309, 335, 345, 347, 365, and 368 were all either seen shot and killed or just reported over the intercom. In the next round, the number called out was 6, and once again everyone rushes to their respective doors, only this time when they are running, Young Mi or player 095 gets bumped and knocked over, which eventually leads her to running out of time and sadly dying. A death that of course not only hurt Yeonju in that moment but also me. Like, Young Mi was about as adorable a character as you could possibly get. Why the hell did she have to fucking die in this moment? Why couldn't it be that fucking shaman bitch? Ain't nobody liking her. But now aside from Young Mi dying in that round, no other players were seen or reported dead at the end of the round. Which of course now brings us on to the final round of this game, with the number called out being number 2. Now in this round we of course see player 001 break the neck of player 343, which wasn't just a badass moment but was also the only confirmed kill in that round. Now with that we of course reach the end of the Mingle game, with a reported 100 players remaining going into the next vote. Also meaning a total of 155 players were actually killed during that last game of death. We then get a brief moment with the detective where we see a member of his team die due to an explosion while looking for the island. We of course then return to the vote, which has ended in a tie, which understandably annoys a lot of people. So much so that both teams begin to fight in the men's room, with 5 players in total dying, 2 from the X's side and 3 from the O's. The numbers seen were as follows: player 230 aka Thanos, and player 331 aka that random fuck. And of course, who could also forget 268, 299 and 401. Again, more random people. But now this of course all meant that the X's now had the advantage going into the vote that would happen tomorrow. Which also of course meant that as the lights would go out, the O's would be out for blood. But before that, we actually see another of the detective's men die on the outside of the games. This guy is of course stabbed and thrown overboard by that lion captain, who actually appears to be secretly working for the front man. Something that only once you actually learn about it seems incredibly fucking obvious. But now as the nightly attacks begin, we of course see a number of the contestants get killed, with the ones of course seen being 185, 182, 102, 406, and sadly the beautiful Say Me or number 380, with 380 having been killed by junkie bastard number 124. Now once the guards burst in and clear the room, we of course see Gi-hun and his team grab and kill many of them. But as they don't exactly wear their numbers on their chest, it's hard to know exactly how many of them were died or who exactly died in this moment. So let's just say it was quite a few guards who died in this moment and moved the hell on. Next we see that as Gi-hun's team is pushing forward, Hyunju absolutely slays out and kills 3 more while moving to the control room, with the young guard that was leading the way following shortly after. We then see player 072 get shot from across the hall, before we then see a couple of more guards die due to the returning fire. We then see Jungbei kill one of the guards on his way to the control room, before we then switch back to the crossfire where we see another guard die and fall 100 feet to the floor. Player 206 is then the next to go, before shortly after he is avenged by some of the other players when they kill 2 more guards. Gi-hun then takes another of the guards with him before he runs out of ammo. Some time then passes and we see Gi-hun actually find and kill another of the guards, before 001 finally reveals his true colours and shoots 2 more players in the back, players 047 and 015. He then pretends to die over the mic to Gi-hun, so I guess you could say 001 is also believed to be dead by Gi-hun and the others. 324 is seen taking out another guard before then turning the gun on himself and killing himself. We then see that as the rest surrender, both 145 and 246 are shot and killed, but it's also widely believed that 246 is in fact still alive and was in fact only shot by guard number 11, who of course is the guard that's seen to have a soft spot for his kid. We then see the man in the black mask appear, and take out his gun, which he of course uses to shoot Jung-bae, of course as punishment to gi-hun for his attempt at escape. Of course, yet another sad death, but also the final death of the season. So with that, we have finally reached the end of today's video. I hope you all enjoyed it, as it took quite a bit of time to put together. So with that said, if you would, please consider liking and subscribing down below, as it would really help us out a lot and I would really appreciate it. But with that, and for me, I'm out. Have a great day or night wherever you are, and peace.